First Youth Devotional from the Gospel of John. Today, believe it or not, this is lesson 21 of the Gospel of John. In addition to the other 6 or 8 lessons we had done before we started this series. Today's message is titled The Tears of Jesus. And tell me at the end if you think that's an appropriate title for this. So this is one of my favorite stories. Who remembers what is happening on that infamous smallest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept? Any ideas? Who thinks they know what this story is going to be about? Bingo, bingo. What does he win? Yes. This is the story of Lazarus. It's really a cool story, and there is a lot of depth and a lot of things we can pull from this story. Obviously, in a short devotional like this, we're not going to pull everything out of this story that could be pulled, but we are going to pull a few things. So to begin with, let's go ahead and read our scriptures. John 11:32 through 44. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in the spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. Here it is. Jesus wept. The shortest verse in the Bible. Right there it is. So this shows you that Jesus had emotion. And that's kind of really important to our lives, especially because we are all about drama and emotion in these years. But we're going to read the rest of this story. But to give it a little bit of context, we started kind of in the middle of the whole story. Before this had happened, Jesus was several days' journey away, and he got news that Lazarus was sick. And he didn't go. And he stayed where he was. He knew what God was going to do here. He already knew what he was going to do. He knew Lazarus was dead before he ever set out to go visit them. Yet, when he gets to this place, when he gets to this point, he weeps. It's very interesting. Let's read the rest. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him?" But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there's a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days." Then Jesus said, "Did not I tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The dead man came out, his hands and his feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." There you have it. There's the story. Now, like I said, there's a lot in this story, but let's listen to Tyler Tuft, the South Dakota DYD, just give us a little bit about this story.
In this story, Jesus' friend Lazarus had died. Lazarus' sisters, Mary and Martha, sent a message to Jesus that Lazarus was very sick. But by the time Jesus arrived, it was too late. Or at least that's what everyone thought. Jesus walked onto the scene and displayed sadness, anger, and confidence all in the face of a terrible tragedy. Jesus approached Mary and Martha and even approaches each of us individually, according to our needs and how we best receive truth and hope. Notice in this chapter that with Martha, Jesus offered the gift of words of truth and hope. He reasoned with her. But with Mary, he gave the gift of his presence and empathy. So what does this teach us about Jesus? Number one, Jesus' sadness shows us that he enters into our pain with us. The shortest verse in the Bible simply states, "Then Jesus wept." Jesus didn't remain emotionless in the face of death and loss. He responded with real tears. And he did this even knowing that in a few moments, he would turn this great grief into an even greater joy. Jesus never guaranteed that we will avoid loss, but he did promise to be present in our pain. Number two, Jesus' anger shows that he hates sin and the effect of sin in our lives. The phrase deep anger made the original reader imagine a furious bull stomping its hooves and angrily snorting as it prepared to charge. Jesus hates sin, and he came to rescue us from the penalty of sin and the power of sin. One day, he will free us from the very presence of sin. And number three, Jesus' confidence in the face of death teaches us that he has the power over life and death. We can trust him, even in situations that seem beyond hope. With just the power of his word, Jesus can speak life into any situation, any life, and any heart.
Such a good word from Tyler. So I want to review his points very briefly. First, Jesus' sadness shows us that he enters into our pain with us. This is really huge. We need to know that Jesus feels what we feel. We need to know that he has experienced what we have experienced. He's real. He knows. He feels. He understands. Second, Jesus' anger shows that he hates sin and the effect that sin has in our lives. Think about it. He used the term hate. He hates sin. That's huge. And number three, Jesus' confidence in the face of death teaches us that he has the power over life and death. Those are some pretty huge situations that we need to be aware of through this story of the healing of Lazarus, through understanding that Jesus wept at the death of his friend, even though he already knew he was going to bring him back to life. That's kind of odd. If you already know that you're bringing Lazarus back to life, why is he crying? It just shows the depth of his love and the depth of his empathy toward us. Okay, so I have some things to discuss. The first one is not a slide to stare at. It's just a question that I want to ask you guys. What are some things that make you sad? And then what do you do about it when you are sad? How do your friends deal with their sadness? And how is that the same or different than how Jesus entered into Mary and Martha's sadness? Listening to sad music, which makes it worse, yes. I don't know if you know people who do this, but a lot of your generation and the generation before you, they would self-harm. That's how they dealt with it, because the pain of the self-harm would release the endorphins that they weren't getting in life. And they would actually become addicted to that. I know it sounds weird, but it becomes an addiction. Other people deal with it with alcohol and drugs or relationships. Some people just fall into depression. These are all somewhat inappropriate ways to deal with sadness. But you have to understand, sadness is an emotion that can then spiral out of control if not dealt with. Well, what did Jesus do with Mary and Martha? He wept. And then he dealt with their situation. Okay, so let's look at one more question. What does it mean for Jesus to be angry at sin and the effect that sin has in our lives? Andy, you should do a devotional for us. But in reality, Andy is correct. So what Andy had to say was absolutely spot on. Jesus hates sin because it's not his plan for us. It was not his plan for Adam and Eve in the garden, and it's not his plan for us now. And the effects that sin has wreaked on the world and on our personhood is what sent Jesus to the cross. So when we get entrenched into sin, it makes him angry. It makes him upset. He doesn't like it. So much of the time we forget that God has emotions too. All through the Bible, he talks about being angry. He talks about being happy. He talks about being sad. He talks about regret. God has these emotions. And so we need to recognize that we have them as well, and we need to learn to operate through our emotions without sinning. Because sometimes our emotions get us to sin because we're not in control of them. We let them control us. So this is an area that a lot of times we need to work on throughout our whole lives, is different sins or different things, letting these things control us. So a last question gets a little bit deeper. Share if you feel comfortable doing so. What is an area of your life where you need more confidence in what God can do? God doesn't put us on earth and say, well, I made you sink or swim on your own. His whole point of coming down to earth and hanging on the cross and bringing us salvation is that he wants to be with us in the middle of our lives. And that includes in the middle of our problems. And so you can be confident, Connor, that he desires to help you in those issues. I think in my personal life, like I told you yesterday or last week, sometime, one of these devotionals, your story is huge. And part of my story is, like Andy, God helped me to speak. God helped me to be able to explain what's inside of me, to get it out. Now, different than Andy, I grew up in a home that was very verbally abusive. And so my reaction to that was to hold everything down inside and to not talk, to not tell where I am, and to not explain even my own feelings or my own thoughts to anybody. I held it all in. And it was a great process that God brought me through that, where now I can talk and express myself and tell people how I feel about things and what I think about things. Because you have a voice, and the world needs to hear your voice. Andy, the world needs to hear your voice. Guys, you guys have a story that others need to hear. And God wants to give you the confidence to walk that story out that he is writing for you. He's writing your story as you walk each day with him. And he will give you the confidence to walk that out. Let me pray for you. Father, I thank you that even in this time of social distancing, you feel us. You feel where we might be sad, what brings us joy, where we may be lonely, where we may lack confidence. You know, and you're right here with us, helping us walk the path that you set before us. Father, I pray for these first year students that they will recognize that just as you recognize the needs of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, three people had totally different needs. You met each one where they were. You come and you meet us where we are. Father, I pray that these students will learn day by day to rely on you and not on themselves, to rely on you and not just what is going through the media, to rely on you and not just their parents. They need to rely on their parents, Lord, but they need to learn to rely on you more as they grow older and older. Father, I pray that each day they grow closer to you and they learn to hear your voice. In Jesus' name, amen.